Imagine a time before cities, before metal, before names for the stars, when the sky bled green fire and the earth hummed with a soft, electrical breath. And ask yourself an unsettling question. What if the first civilization did not build with brick and bronze, but with perception and light? And what if its greatest monuments are not lost ruins, but altered minds still echoing in us now, faint as starlight, persistent as dawn, waiting to be recalled with a tremor of awareness? Stories of luminous teachers ripple across cultures like reflected moonlight across dark water, untouchable yet seen, from the shining brothers of the Andes to the radiant beings of the Australian dreaming, from the Sumerian sages emerging wet from the sea to the Shemsu-Hor, the followers of a falcon god who gleamed with solar knowledge. And these myths do not claim stone walls or chariots, but gifts of measure, memory, and the art of seeing the world as a fabric of living light that could be tuned, guided, and revealed by ritual, by rhythm, by attention itself. In the chalk belly of Europe, Paleolithic hands smeared pigments that catch and store warmth. Binders that flicker under flame into motion, bowls flexing in a cave that becomes a cinema for minds without language, while ultraviolet paints, invisible in day, blaze at a particular wavelength when the right mineral torch burns, turning a grotto into a classroom where darkness is an instrument and light is a teacher, a performance arranged by those who understood that to shape awareness is to shape reality. The archaeology of luminosity is quiet yet stubborn, a scatter of clues that glow more brightly the more they are gathered, like the curious phenomenon of Egyptian blue, a pigment dead from millennia that still emits infrared light when illuminated, as if it is a small battery charged by attention, and the mica-flecked plasters in certain tombs that shimmer like water when lamplight drifts across them, and the polished calcite lenses found where no optician should have been, thick with fingerprints and soot as if used for more than mere ornament. At Göbekli Tepe, the pillars lift like tuning forks toward a sky sucked clean of moisture and cloud, animals watching from the stone in a ring of intentional silence. And some suggest the arrangement is less a calendar than a chamber for choreography, where the first beings of awareness were not gods, but states of mind invoked by sound, light, and hunger, sharpened by nights without sleep, released by the flicker of flame on carved eyes that seemed to watch the watcher as the stars leaned nearer. On the island of Malta, deep in the Hal Saflieni hypogeum, a chamber carved so smooth it would shame a pearl, a human voice dropped to a certain pitch makes the stone body sing with a standing resonance that wraps around the head like a soft crown. And here, in the red ochre twilight, it is easy to imagine a ceremony of the luminous, where awareness is lifted out of the body like a lantern from a dark boat, and returned a little different, remembering a place older than language. The deeper one follows these murmurs, the more they gather in patterns, aligning not only with solstices and equinoxes, but with invisible paths in the air, with frequencies of sound and the piezoelectric anxiety of crystals under pressure, with the strangely universal fascination for spirals and ladders scratched into stone, shapes that also form spontaneously in the nervous system, when eyes are closed and the brain is flooded with breath, fear, or plant fire, as if ancient artists were tracing a map they found not in the sky, but inside their skulls. If the lost civilization of light existed, its ruins would be found in architectures that frame a single ray of dawn for a few minutes a year. In rock with quartz veins, crushed into microscopic filaments, capable of charging under stress, and glowing in darkness as tectonic whisper becomes light. In playhouses for perception, where nothing was permanent but the lesson, and nothing was owned but the way of looking at the world until the world opened like a pupil. Fragments of a text ripple through medieval catalogues under different names. The Book of First Illumination, Lux Prima, the Codex of Clear Sight, always described as a nuisance or an aberration because it claims no origin and offers no salvation, only exercises and diagrams of rays, spirals, and eyes, advising that the cleanest lens is the one behind the forehead. And though no full copy survives, marginalia linger like embers, enough to suggest that someone carried a mouthful of an older fire through centuries of ash. One scribble, tucked in the gutter of a monastic compendium, speaks of a procession following a moving band of light along a stony plain that glowed even when the moon was thin. Pilgrimage of watchers who learned to taste the sky with their skin. And it mentions a place where day and night exchanged their garments at strange hours. A basin of glass and wind, where images danced on the horizon like birds made of heat. In the heart of the Sahara, in a desert that remembers lakes the size of countries, fields of pale green glass lie in thin sheets. Fused sand that many attribute to an ancient exploding sky, and among these nodules of frozen lightning, engravings show figures whose heads flare like the sun, and whose hands hold lines of dots arcing between stones, as if measuring a brightness we can barely name. And nearby, in boulders peppered with cup marks, the hollows collect starlight in shallow pools when dew visits, turning rock into a sky of wet, inverted constellations. Archaeoastronomers walk these dunes with instruments and find alignments not just to Sirius and Orion, but to the rising of a strange light that is neither moon nor star, a milky band that brightens and darkens in cycles like a heartbeat. Perhaps the zodiacal glow that lifts just before dawn in clean atmospheres. A sign easy to miss in our electric age, yet explicit in stone lines that frame it as if it were a teacher arriving on time each year. Conventional history prefers clean thresholds. Agriculture, then towns, then writing. But under that tidy staircase run older stairs going nowhere. Hints of disciplines that were not recorded because they did not require clay or quill. Only a body and a sky, and a willingness to sit with the darkness until it ripened into shape and instruction. A patience that makes modern life restless. And yet, in these shapes, we feel something familiar. A memory of calm attention, like the moment a storm passes and the air smells of iron and ozone. Between ice sheets, humans were forced to huddle around warmth and share breath and story. And the minds that survived were those that could find order in the flicker and the wind, that could see patterns in clouds of geese and sparks of frost, that could be told how to build pathways between sight, sound, skin, and thought. And if a people mastered those pathways, they might pass it on less as doctrine than as a music, a series of notes to be played within anyone's own skull until the secret is no longer secret, because it is simply how one sees. For traces of such teaching, we are left with stones that admit a narrow sun, only once in winter, and chambers whose faint lines burst into clarity when a single oil flame is placed at a calibrated angle. With pigments that hum invisibly under wavelengths, our ancestors could access with clever fire, with mirrors of polished obsidian that drink candlelight and return faces transformed, and with old whispers that the first beings were not external visitors, but the earliest achievements of the brain, learning to witness itself with a steady gaze. In archives, a handful of field notes from an expedition to a Saharan depression record, a curiosity quickly dismissed. When walking along a certain transect at twilight, after a long day of heat, the horizon shimmered in such a way that voices grew hushed and time felt altered, as if the world itself were whispering. And when the team returned after dark, the glass underfoot sang with tiny clicks like frost cracking, a music of stress and release made audible in the cold, a song of stone that can be heard if you wait long enough. If the first civilization crafted instruments for attention, then their cathedrals are anywhere. The world acts strangely at a certain hour, and it may be that the secrets we chase in remote deserts have also been hiding in caves, in basements of air, in chambers of engineered darkness, where a hand held steady can pull light out of dust. And perhaps the greatest secret is that the door has always been open, and we have been walking past it in our hurry for newer, brighter lamps. Somewhere under sand, a corridor of polished stone is rumored to run in a straight line between two outcrops, an impossible guideway for a sliver of dawn on a date when the desert is at its coldest, and satellite eyes scanning for subtle changes in night temperature have recently marked a faint scar like a buried mirror, a place where trapped air cools strangely, as if the ground itself still remembers a passage and is waiting to exhale. Beyond the reach of neat answers, under dune and memory, the next trail reaches into the earth where darkness is thick as velvet and light must be taught to walk, into places where the walls pulse at certain tones, and the human head becomes both lamp and receiver. And in that subterranean hush, it is possible the first beings of awareness still whisper under the roar of our present, a signal we can follow if we dare to listen longer than is comfortable. Below fields and houses, and a century of footsteps, the ground opens into corridors carved when the last ice retreated, and in those caves the air tastes like old rain, mingled with the smoke of forgotten torches, where even a breath becomes visible in the lamplight. And here, in this patient dark, the technology of the lost civilization feels least like myth and most like method, because a wall is only a surface until the right light makes it move. In Lascaux, the animals bend and leap when fire dances, a trick of pigment and curve that relies on the brain's hunger for motion, while the ceiling's calcite blooms hold tiny crystals that flare with a slow glow when warmed by flame, a phosphorescent echo of touch. And in that suspended cinema, the viewer's awareness is not only seeing, but being seen, as if the chamber itself were looking back, an exchange that leaves a residue in the mind that modern screens can imitate, but never fully replace. Entoptic forms dots, grids, zigzags that dance behind closed eyelids, rise in nearly every culture's art when people fast, chant, or lie in darkness long enough, and the cave provides a controlled laboratory for these inner lights, a place to amplify, to guide, to align them with music shaped by stone, so that internal rivers run parallel with external walls until they merge briefly, giving the sensation of stepping into a larger mind without leaving your body. Malta's hypogeum of Hal Saflieni is tuned to about 110 Hz, a low note that, when sustained, saturates a human chest cavity like a bowl of water, and those who sit within report shimmering at the edges of sight, a rim of pale light that might be called imagination if it were not so repeatable. And here you can picture an early academy where elders taught pupils to ride sound into colors, to let the ear pull the eye across a threshold neither sense reaches alone. There is a stone chamber in a lesser-known Cornish barrow where a square protrusion on the wall reflects flame with strange fidelity, brightening rather than dulling, reminiscent of polished gypsum panels once used in the Near East to bounce sunlight into rooms. And such surfaces, placed in the right geometry, can intensify a small point of light into a presence that feels larger than the lamp, as if someone else has joined you in the room without entering. A conjuration achieved by angle, patience, and breath. Across the Mediterranean, in the painted caves of the Levant, dotted halos surround hands and eyes, as if observers drew the sensation of light emanating from faces in the absolute dark. And modern experiments with sensory deprivation suggest that after hours in a lightless, sound-shaped space, the visual cortex begins its own hymn, offering luminous filigree to a seeker trained to hold the line between wakefulness and dream, a line the first beings of awareness may have taught others to walk like tightrope artists. When the Sahara was wet and full of fish, caves cutting the edges of ancient lakes hid galleries of cattle and masked figures with radiating crowns. And the presence of quartz nodules in the surrounding rock suggests more than pigment art. Quartz under mechanical stress produces a faint electrical field, and some suspect that pounding drums or moving heavy stones in such spaces could kindle tiny sparks or luminous phantoms on scuffed surfaces, merging physics with ceremony in a way we are only beginning to test. Among Australian rock shelters, the Wandjina are painted with featureless, haloed faces and rivulets like streams of light flowing down, and elders speak of them as cloud and rain beings, givers of law and memory, their light not a burning glare, but the cool sheen of water spread thin over stone, an aesthetic that feels like instruction rather than spectacle, as if the purpose of these presences were to calm the suggestion of fire and lead observers into a lucid stillness where attention widens and sharpens. In Tibet and the Indian Himalaya, texts describe the clear light of the mind, not as metaphor, but as experienced field, bright without object, a knowledge older than thought that can be trained through breath and posture. And in the Egyptian tradition, the Ba, the mobile aspect of the human being, is illustrated as a bird with a luminous face, while temple ceilings bloom with stars small enough to fall in the eye, reminding that the first sacred spaces may have been built to invoke specific inner responses rather than to hold crowds. On the far side of the world, the Olmec carved polished mirrors out of iron ore, concave and convex discs capable of producing tiny points of intense light or spreading a flame thin as mist. And such tools make light something to be shaped by hand, catchable, directable, a companion rather than a condition. And if the first beings of awareness taught anything, it may have been the intimacy of light, how to cradle it, move it, and let it move you. Within bone, light needs another path. The pineal organ, rich with photoreceptive proteins in many animals, sits in humans like a relic behind the eyes, still reactive to rhythms of day and night, capable of modulating chemicals that alter attention. And in extended darkness, the brain's chemistry shifts toward patterns that make inner imagery vivid enough to feel real, a biological gate that ancient technicians of consciousness could open through architecture, ritual timekeeping, and deliberate deprivation. This is not an argument that cavemen had laboratories, but a recognition that the lab may have been the cave itself, a precisely accessible machine of darkness where the human nervous system could be pushed gently into states it could not reach under ordinary conditions. And in those states, the luminous figures encountered, the teachers, the first beings, would feel external because the self had become large enough to step outside its old boundaries, an expansion that would be described as meeting someone brighter than you. Satellite maps of the Central Sahara at night show points of anomalous coolness that do not match dunes or rock, but something smoother, as if heat is sinking into a buried surface with unusual speed. And when researchers overlaid these points with old survey maps, they saw a line, a corridor drawn straight as an arrow through emptiness, crossing paleo channels like a decision, too disciplined for geology and too forgotten for a modern road. Ground-penetrating radar expeditions have filed obscure reports of density changes along such lines, the signatures of voids or trimmed bedrock under meters of drift, while a rumor among oil surveyors tells of a narrow tunnel that catches the first light of day for a heartbeat around the winter solstice, a phenomenon only noticed because a camera was left running, and the footage, hazy and whispering with wind, shows a beam slipping through sand before vanishing into a seam, like a memory trying to rise. Close by, the great circular formation called the Richet structure stares like an eye from space, a ringed dome of layered rock. It has looked like a city to those who wish to find one. But beyond the temptation of fantasy lies a more subtle fact. Its concentric rims resemble rings in a tree where growth accelerates and stalls, and pilgrims still cross it at dawn to watch light climb those curves in ways that bend time inside the mind, a slow-motion sunrise on stone that clauses the day into layered sentences. If a corridor does exist beneath these sands, it might have served not as a passage for bodies, but as a conduit for a single ray, a shaft tuned to the angle of a planet slightly closer to a star than it is now, or to a light that is no longer regular, like the ephemeral glow of dust along the ecliptic lane. And entering such a tunnel at the right instant would be to be written on by light rather than to look at it, a difference that could change a life. What begins as curiosity about caves turns into a web touching the sky, because the methods of light depend on what the sky offers. And there are moments in Earth's history when the sky offers too much, when auroras roar at latitudes where apples grow, when meteoric dust hazes the air into a constant curly twilight, when the vanishing tail of a comet blows a trail across the horizon like a river of ghost fire. And in those years, the human nervous system receives a crash course in luminosity, whether it wants to or not. In the Book of First Illumination's Scattered Remarks, a sketch shows a line from a western desert to a northern sea through a point marked with 3 small crowns, a strange symbol repeated among Sami stone altars in the subarctic, and the note beneath reads only, "Where the sky sings, we walked until the hair rose," hinting at a curriculum that extended beyond stone and pigment into the theater of the polar lights, where beings of light are not metaphor, but weather. The corridor in sand, the cave in rock, the outcrop under aurora. 3 classrooms linked by a curriculum of attention, and the next lesson waits in the cold air, where light dances without flame, where ancient voices claim to see forms in the curtains of green, forms that smiled and warned and taught, if one could stand the chill long enough to listen to the sky. Water curves light, stone remembers pressure, and the places where water and stone meet have a way of teaching those who sit quietly beside them, which may be why some of the oldest ceremonial sites are less temples than instruments tuned to the small voices of the world. And in those instruments, if a civilization of light left anything, it was a blueprint for guiding awareness, like a river into a carved shadow that returns as mist and rain. Newgrange in Ireland admits a blade of dawn only on the shortest days. A narrow ray that slides along a trench, climbs a shelf, and illuminates a spiral in the back chamber with a tenderness out of proportion to the cold stone, and the beam moves so slowly you can feel the earth turning on your skin. A tactile astronomy that teaches time as a partner rather than an adversary. This choreography so confident, it makes the human act of waiting feel like a sacrament. In Orkney, Meshow drinks the winter sun in a similar way, filing it into its core, and the surrounding ring of brocks and chambers suggests a network of coordinated light harvesting structures, less concerned with seeing the heavens than with letting the heavens see them. A mutual recognition that leaves the watcher feeling located in a larger map, and in such maps, the first beings of awareness are not aliens, but aspects of a world that has noticed us back. Chavin de Huandre in the high Peruvian Andes turns water into voice, with channels that amplify the roar of mountain streams into a growl that fills the stone like a myth. And the galleries inside are cut so that torchlight disorients, even as it tries to guide, creating a labyrinth not for the feet, but for the one who thinks with the body, until the stone idol called the Lanzon rises in the dark like a wedge of night with teeth, and facing it requires an attention so intense it becomes light. At Tiwanaku, near the inland sea of Titicaca, silted plazas once held shallow pools polished by wind, and some think these were not decorative, but precise water mirrors. A way to watch stars at noon by seeing them ripple in daylight on the surface. A trick of optics that lends the watcher a second sky beneath their feet, and to stand on the edge of a still pool while the sun burns and see a bright point appear is to learn that light hides as much as it reveals. Obsidian mirrors, their surfaces black and deep, were portals not because they housed spirits, but because they forced eyes to shift how they gather light, pulling subtle faces out of the grain, teaching the brain to accept that a shadow can hold an image as strong as a glare, which is a nervous system skill as much as a superstition. A lesson in seeing that extends to reading the sky, to gleaning shapes in faint auroral bands, to recognizing a halo around your own breath on a cold night. In Mesoamerican workshops, artisans polished rock crystal into lenses that magnify and concentrate, possibly for fire making, possibly for art. But the technique implies a mental relationship with light as a material, manipulable, and ductile. And if this relationship was widespread in deep time, then the myth of the first beings could be read as the earliest names given to the acts of focusing, diffusing, and reflecting, as if cognition were a set of optical operations that a teacher could model with stone and sun. Far north, stories tell of navigating by a stone that finds the sun through cloud, and modern experiments with Iceland spar, a clear calcite that separates a single beam into two polarized twins, show that rotating such a crystal in your hand until the twins match allows one to locate the hidden star, a craft known to Vikings as sunstone, and elsewhere older still. Certain navels of the world yield calcite with properties too perfect to ignore, suggesting the technique was once part of a wider grammar of light. A handful of early 20th century reports from explorers in North Africa and the Caucasus mention rooms with luminous altars, slabs of pale rock that seemed to glow after sunset, dismissed as exaggeration until we learned of tribal luminescence, light released when crystals are rubbed or struck, a phenomenon that could be harnessed accidentally during ritual, making stone shine under pressure in a way that would certainly be interpreted as presence, instruction, or approval. If water mirrors turn sky into an eye beneath, and burnished stone makes the smallest flame feel vast, then what were the corridors that carry single beams deep into earth, if not needles threading a seam between worlds? And if we now call them solar alignments, perhaps their deeper purpose was to educate the nervous system to the taste of timing, to teach the body a calendar it could feel in the spine, so that when the sky began to storm, people could act not with fear, but with a practiced calm. The sky does storm, and once in a while the storm is not weather but light, as when a solar outburst tears into the magnetosphere, and auroras pour south into lands that have no memory for them, painting nocturnal rivers over crops like messages in a forgotten script. And after certain cometary passages, dust veils the earth so that dawns are brightened and twilights elongated, an eerie white that keeps birds singing at wrong hours, a side effect powerful enough to be stored in myth as a year of nights that would not end. Greenland's ice, archived year by year like pages in a book, holds microscopic ash and dust, whose composition tells stories of ancient skies, and in one band close to the onset of the Younger Dryas, analyzes whisper of particles that scatter light in curious ways, microplates with the geometry of fine mirrors, perhaps volcanic, perhaps something stranger. And if the world then was bathed for seasons in a pearly wash, the minds inside it would have been trained involuntarily by ambient luminescence, a societal initiation into the curriculum of the lost civilization without any temple. Plasma physics has a way of sculpting the sky into forms that the human eye insists on naming: herringbone arcs, rayed crowns, ladders connecting horizon to zenith, And rock art from disparate continents presents these shapes with a repetition that suggests not imagination, but documentation. An archive of light storms translated into iconography, which later became pantheons as people gave the shapes will and voice. Because to survive a night when the sky writhes is to feel addressed, and that address clings. Shemsu-Hor, the followers of a sky falcon whose eye is a sun, are said in late Egyptian memory to have ruled before the first kings, keepers of a knowledge that made measures sweet and seasons predictable, and whether they were real people or a name for ancestral expertise. The implication is unambiguous. There is a lineage of light that runs under the lineage of crowns, and if it has no graves, it may be because it kept moving in the minds of those who refused to forget how to look. South of the Great Lakes, copper veins weep into cold water, and there is evidence that someone worried at them in the Bronze Age with a focus that seems out of place, hauling metal across inland seas, a trade that whispers of ships wearing out their keels on stone in a time when they should not exist. And copper loves to carry electrons and throw green light when electrons jump. So if an old discipline learned to move current through Earth, to stir auroras faintly, or to read Earth's humming, the copper trails would be their fingerprints. An old pilot's log, misfiled with fishing charts, describes a glow on the horizon near the pole that did not move with sun or moon, a fixed pale like a city over the edge of the world, and the note attributes it to a trick of ice and cloud, which it may well be, because ice is a master of optics, stacking plates and needles until the air becomes a lens. Yet this faint city appears in multiple accounts, suggesting a stable place where light gets caught and held, a natural reminder that the world itself can mirror intention. Before radio, sailors learned to see the polarization of sky with their naked eyes, an ability that fades in adulthood as artificial light smooths differences into blandness. And early peoples may have trained children to keep this sensitivity, to navigate through haze and season by the way glare shifts at the edge of vision, which is a craft of attention as much as acuity. And it tells us that light undergirds a kind of literacy that sits beneath words. A literacy the first beings of awareness could seed without leaving a trace in clay. If ice and ash conspired to bend light around the young world, and people learned to walk those bends like tightropes, then we can understand how myths of luminous teachers could originate without invoking gods from other stars, because the stars themselves were coming closer in feeling, if not in fact. And under these skies, ritual was not decoration, but a science of staying calm within radiance, a way to belong to a storm without being broken, the way a song belongs to a voice without being caged. From a cave that acts as a darkroom to a platform that holds a water mirror to a corridor that threads a dawn, the architecture is consistent. Make conditions that sharpen a particular sense. Edge it toward its threshold, and hold it there until the mind learns a new shape. And this shaping is the artifact, not the stone, which is why we keep missing the ruins, even while standing among them, because we are looking for cities when we should be looking for skills. In the cold archives, among microfiche and sediment smears, a sketch maps lines of aurora over ancient stones, not as star alignments, but as arcs that match modern satellite images of the auroral oval. A wild hypothesis filed with a librarian's bored nod, and the thought sits like a glowing coal. What if some old structures were set to mirror not the positions of stars, but the wandering curtain of polar light, teaching people to read a weather of electricity as if it were scripture? The answer may lie where rock and ice marry in tunnels of blue and white, where light refracts through living cold and the walls hum with ancient air. And rumors insist that under a southern cap there is a cavern where ice crystals grow like cathedrals, and something man-made sits, a lattice not quite stone, not quite metal, a thing designed to encourage a very particular kind of attention. And down there the red heartbeat of modern engines has been heard, which means someone is already listening. On winter nights when the geomagnetic wind sighs, the sky at high latitudes ceases being a ceiling and becomes an ocean. And beneath the auroral surf, people have always felt watched, recognized, and taught by curtains of green and red that draw long breaths like animals sleeping. And those who lived with this weather learned to hold their gaze without blinking until the light divided and rejoined. And in that quiet, the first beings of awareness acquired faces without ever leaving the air. Among the Sami, sacred Seta stones mark places where offerings are made to forces that watch over reindeer and people, and in certain valleys, aurora hangs like long hair combed by wind, leading watchers to believe in presences that do not step on snow, yet leave tracks in thought. An old advice warns not to wave or whistle at the lights lest they come too close. A reminder that to enter this classroom, one must keep still, receive, and remain humble before a sky that seems to speak. In Inuit lore, the Exarniat play across cold heavens like ball games of spirits, and those who have endured long nights in open air report a felt pressure on the skin as aurora intensifies, a tingling that runs up forearms and along the scalp, a haptic component to light that makes it more like weather against which one can lean. And such bodily learning shapes a mind toward attention as occupation rather than effort, a stance the first beings would have demanded as prerequisite to their lessons. The Yakut tell of light walkers who cross the tundra without footprints, their movements synchronized with the shimmer above, and their instruction is a rhythm rather than a speech, a repetition of arrivals and withdrawals that trains those beneath to wait for a return without anxiety, an art crucial to survival in climates where resources surge and vanish. And it is not hard to imagine a culture built around this pacing, a tempo of life inspired by the sky's breath. Far to the south, the Maori trace ancestry to Tahunui Arangi, who climbed ladders of light to fetch knowledge from the heavens. And rock art in Central Australia shows parallel lines with rungs connecting them, a depiction that plasma physics reproduces in laboratory discharges, suggesting that when the atmosphere was troubled by larger electrical flows in antiquity, it displayed consistent shapes that humans everywhere memorized not as an oddity, but as a library of signs, each rung a step of thought. Greeks, writing from a gentler latitude, speak of Hyperborea beyond the north wind, a land where songs and light never cease, and their stories are saturated with music that one suspects they were listening at secondhand to descriptions of aurora and polar dawn, translating color and motion into lyre and hymn. And in that translation, the first beings of awareness become friendly, a chorus rather than a threat, a civility of the sky rather than its violence. Iran's ancient memory contains Ariana Veja, a primordial region of brightness and cold, the seabed of order against chaos. And though the geography is contested and the theology layered, the psychological fact holds. Brightness and cold together form a formidable teacher, compelling stillness and vigilance. And in that stillness, the mind behaves like a lake, a mirror for star and aurora alike. And under such conditions, one learns not to agitate the water more than necessary. In the Rig Veda, dawn is a goddess, Ushas, who unfurls and dresses herself in light, arriving with cows of brightness and roads of gold. And while these songs are thick with metaphor, they are also exact about timing, about the feel of the world as dark dilutes and bird calls shift, about the flavor of iron in air at first light. And such precision indicates craft, a practiced intimacy with the transition of light that would be necessary to use it as a lever on awareness, which the first beings seem eager to do. Egyptian ceilings studded with stars around blue bands of none bring the sky inside stone with such confidence that we forget the technological feat. Pigments that hold their hue in damp, polishes that keep reflective surfaces alive, alignment to cardinal and solstitial points that transmits the sky's grammar to those who will never sleep outside. And this is pedagogy as architecture, a curriculum in walls and light that will instruct hearts long after mouths fall silent. In Central America, an obsidian disc held before an initiate reflects both their face and a lamp in the same glossy darkness, teaching how the self and light cohabit, a single surface without blending, a lesson in duality that breaks cleanly when wind extinguishes the flame and the face remains, a trick that frightens once and then delights, a ritualized paradox that loosens thought from its habits and allows broader patterns to float up into awareness where they can be weighed. Modern researchers investigating extreme auroras report an acoustic phenomenon, faint clicking and crackling heard during intense displays, possibly due to corona discharges near the ear, possibly mere suggestion. But the overlap between recorded spherics and subjective sound is enough to teach caution, for the brain can be coaxed by expectation into hearing what it needs. And the first beings of awareness would have known this bias and built exercises to test it, mixing inner and outer signals until the student could tell the difference without doubt. Certain megaliths appear puzzled until one overlays them with the average position of the auroral oval, at which point stones once thought to echo random star clusters align beautifully with the northern brightness, mapping not pinpoint stars, but a persistent band, a belt in the heavens that swells and shrinks over cycles of the sun's temperament. A phenomenon that a long-lived culture could chart over generations, embedding its pulses into myth as a calendar older than the plow. On the Isle Royale and around Lake Superior, pits bite into ancient copper veins, tens of thousands of scars that speak of labor beyond local need. And if tools and vessels of that copper traveled far, then a network existed across water and forest that is almost invisible to our maps, a net woven through seasons and auroras, where light on water at midnight told stories to navigators who learned to keep still and read, And in these quiet roots, the first civilization operates not as empire, but as a climate of thought. A classified wartime report, declassified later with heavy redactions, presents experiments with polished calcite plates to detect polarized sky for navigation during blackout, citing older ethnographic hints that such methods were once known in daylight. And the deadpan crows of engineers inadvertently bears witness to a lineage interrupted and partially restored, as if the world keeps forgetting its cleverness, only to stumble upon it again when need tightens. And each rediscovery feels like the echo of a teacher's hand on the shoulder. Stories persist of an Antarctic cavern warmed by geothermal breath, where ice arches over brine pools that glow faintly from microbial bioluminescence. A palace of blue fire, humming in a register that humans feel in the chest rather than hear. And in the deeper chambers, stalactites of frozen fog catch headlamps and throw them back in prismatic spray, baptizing visitors in rainbows that need no sun, which is the kind of place the first beings of awareness would recognize at once as a classroom worth crossing a planet to reach. Whispers claim there is something else under that ice, a lattice neither wholly artificial nor fully natural, a framework seeded into cracks that coax crystals to grow along precise lines, guiding the play of light in predictable currents, a work of patience and humility that uses the slow chemistry of freezing to distill attention from those who come. Because to enter such a place is to surrender speed, and in that surrender, the lesson begins whether you want it or not. The auroral teachers of the north, the light corridors of stone, the water mirrors of high plains, the icy refractors in polar caves. These are not separate wonders, but organs of a single body. And to study them is to study the anatomy of a civilization that writes not in script, but in the nervous system of those who attend. A civilization without kings, because each student becomes sovereign over their inner weather, which may be why it vanished into us rather than into ruins. If we want to step nearer, we must accept the pace of glaciers and the silence of stones, where the smallest change in light can organize a mind like a dropped needle aligns iron filings, and a final classroom waits where cold and brightness need thoughts into clarity, where the first beings of awareness still walk as edges, as glows, as patience. And to find it, we will need not a stronger lantern, but a steadier hand over the flame. Part 5. Sleep is an archive we carry without shelves, and the threshold into it has always been a classroom for those teaching light, a place where waking thought thins, and another way of seeing starts to bloom with its own brightness. And the first civilization seems to have known this well, building rites and chambers to widen that doorway until people could walk through without fear, returning with seeds they could plant in day. Across floodplains and coasts, memory speaks of watchfires that were more than heat, trios and rings of flame set at distances that tuned peripheral vision to their rhythm, a practice that brings the brain into coherent oscillations, the way a drumbeat aligns footsteps, and as eyes softened, faces in smoke would appear, a phenomenon of pattern detection that can be shaped toward terror or toward instruction. And the first beings of awareness appear to have chosen the latter, teaching people to meet their own projections with curiosity rather than recoil. The Egyptian house of life was a term for places where knowledge breathed, and in some papyri, winding among medicinal recipes and hymn fragments. There are diagrams of a human head crowned with rays, an instruction to sit in a dim room facing a polished stone until light appears without lamp, an exercise in coaxing the mind's clear brightness to show itself. And if one did this within walls aligned to stars and tones that warmed the bones, the effect would not be private delusion, but communal craft. At Eleusis, the mystery was a thismos, a thing shown, and though secrecy sealed the mouths of initiates, glimpses of their theater reveal carefully controlled darkness, sudden blossomings of light, and sounds that seemed larger than the room, a sensory architecture that prompts a particular awe, not the thunderous awe of fear, but the quiet awe of recognition, a rediscovery of something the brain once did easily before noise and haste braided themselves into the culture. As in Greece, so in Mesoamerica, where vision serpents rise in carved lintels like columns of smoke and light interweaving, scholars point to ritual breath and incense as the curtain that prompts inner sight, a deliberate narrowing of the world so that a bright thread can become visible, and the serpent becomes not a monster, but a wave, the medium by which messages travel between hemispheres of the brain, between waking and dream, between human and the more than human field we live inside. Modern science pads softly into this old domain with measurements of gamma synchrony during meditation and subtle phosphenes induced by pressure. Around the eyes are gentle magnetic fields, and while such data can strip mystery from experience by translating it into graphs, it can also give new respect for the nerve, for tissue learning to hold coherence long enough to perceive its own luminous capacities, a physiology of attention that the first civilization likely knew by feel rather than by name. The lost civilization of light may not have had cities because its achievement was not infrastructure but skill, a folk technology of perception transmitted by ritual and place, by the geometry of corridors and the discipline of waiting. And if it is lost, it is because nothing perforates like forgetting, because empires prefer things that can be counted and taxed to things that must be practiced quietly in the heart. And yet practice leaves fingerprints everywhere for those who care to look. Traces persist in house designs that bring a square of sky into central rooms where families breathe together, in the way certain plazas calm the nervous system upon entry, because they fold sound and light into slower eddies. In the persistence of dawn songs even in cities, in the reverence for windowsills and thresholds that are tuned to light at particular hours, all small artifacts of a pedagogy that trained people to be aware of awareness, to hold it like a flame against wind. Where conspiracies gather around these old traces, they are often shadows thrown by our own hunger for lost perfection. Yet a few corners hold more than rumor, vaults where artifacts glow with more than respect. And among those who quietly study them, there is a recurring conclusion that the greatest secret is not in devices or inscriptions, but in a way of holding attention steady enough to become a different kind of mirror, one that reflects not the face, but the field around it, allowing information to pass through without distortion. In such steadiness, dreams change, becoming less a tumble of images and more a slow river linking night to day, and traditions that share practices for lucid dreaming, for waking between dreams, for rolling the attention across the threshold without breaking it, feel like branches of the same tree, an old curriculum adapted to new climates. And those who follow it report the same teachers appearing in different mouths, beings of light that ask only for quiet, patience, and kindness toward those who cannot yet see. Archaeologists sometimes find polished floors in places where no one would dance, narrow rooms with resonant sweet spots, lines packed into stone that make no sense unless you remember the tilt of dawn in a particular year. And the temptation is to assign these to religion and move on. But if you will sit in those rooms, at those hours, with those tones, something happens that cannot be filed away neatly. A learning that is not about belief, but about the plasticity of perception. A muscle being trained by its own stretching. Perhaps the first beings of awareness are not beings in the way we think, not entities with history, but patterns that appear whenever conditions are correct, a weather of mind and light that wears many names. And if so, then our era can meet them again, not by excavating deeper, but by constructing the conditions in which they arise, by using what we know of sound, darkness, geometry, and patience to recreate the schools they once tended under glaciers and auroras without owning a single stone. The secret, then, is not in antiquity, but in fidelity, in holding the practices long enough for them to work on us the way water erodes stone, slowly, lovingly, until a channel forms where light can travel without distortion. And when it does, myths come alive not as stories, but as instructions, less about what to believe and more about how to be, how to wait, how to soften the edges of attention until the world's hidden outlines come forward to meet us. The civilization of light dissolves into a method for seeing the world as a net of luminous relationships, where rock and water and air are not backdrops, but collaborators. And this method appears wherever people surrender to conditions that teach it. In caves, under aurora, near mirrors of obsidian, in the throat of a chanting room, and in bedrooms where phones are put away and dusk is allowed to do its old work again. The slow unwinding of the day into a lesson beyond words. On some nights, if you step outside and look up, you can feel that net vibrating gently with the day's heat and the subtle pull of the moon. And by softening your gaze so that edges blur and shadows fill, you join a fraternity older than language, the watchers who trained their bodies to receive instruction from light itself. And in that fraternity, the first beings of awareness are both ancestors and outcomes, the name we give to what happens when perception stabilizes into clarity. No ruin marks their capital, because the capital was an arrangement of sensations, a cathedral of sequence and tone, repeated until it could be carried anywhere the sky could be seen. And this portability made it resilient, surviving floods and wars by vanishing into breath and posture, and the hand raised to shield twilight that is almost too bright to bear. Those small gestures that train a lifetime without fanfare or inscription. We are not outside this story. We are its current chapter, with technologies that can either numb or refine. And every lamp we build is an echo of the first controlled flames in caves where bulls began to move and awareness. Learn to hold steady, and the choice remains ours to use light as smothering glare or as delicate chisel. And the first beings of awareness, however we name them, wait every dusk to begin again. Before you drift into sleep, remember mystery is never truly lost, only waiting to be found. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more relaxing ancient mysteries, and let your curiosity guide you deeper.